With the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, the nation mourns the loss of its longest-serving monarch, and the sport of horse racing mourns the loss of one of its most enthusiastic participants and, many would agree, one of its very best friends. We've spent some time in conversation with some of the key players in the sport of horse racing who give us their memories and reflections. We'll hear first of all from Sir Michael Stoute, who begins by telling us what he feels the loss of the Queen means to the sport.
Well, one's trying to adjust because, you know, there is a great sadness because she was just such a very special lady.
You got to meet her personally, training over the years for decades. In fact, what made her so special, apart from her being head of the state, now Queen?
Well, I think that we were seeing her in a great environment because she was such a profound horsewoman. So she was in her element around horses and very relaxed. It was her great hobby.
But that day with Estimate, it must have been almost magical that you've just said. The one race, I mean, she'd won classics, hasn't she? She'd been runner-up in the Derby, she'd been champion owner. The one race that really captivated her.
Well, we only knew that afterwards, that she really coveted that race. And it was a great evening because Carl and I and Ryan and Michelle had dinner at Windsor Castle afterwards. So that was a great thrill. And she was, as we were departing, she was just chatting with Ryan and said, oh, I understand you got 2-day suspension. What was that for? Interference, Ryan said. And she said, an error? No, ma'am.
Those engages they had, obviously Ryan's a man of few words, he's modest with his words, but what he shows on his face when he's around her, and particularly on that day, obviously it was a very joyful occasion, it just exudes out of him.
But he felt very privileged and he loved his conversations with her because she knew so much about it all. He found it fascinating.
How will racing move forward without her presence, without her being in racing?
Well, we will miss her greatly, and we will just have to wait and see.
When we think of horse racing and Her Majesty the Queen, we think, of course, of Royal Ascot. We can hear now from Ascot's Director of Racing, Nick Smith, who talks about the very special relationship between Her Majesty and the royal meeting.
Well, the Queen, of course, was here at Royal Ascot pretty much every day of her life during that week in June. Sadly, towards the end of her life this year, she was unable to come due to her poor health. But she loved being here. She absolutely loved seeing the horses. She loved meeting racing people. She loved everything about the racecourse.
Unfortunately, as you've alluded to there, Her Majesty didn't make the last Royal Ascot, but I remember being here with you at the Ascot when racing came back, and when she came on the final Saturday, the memories, the roof nearly came off, didn't it?
I mean, that was a remarkable day, I mean, we'd been very privileged and fortunate that other members of the royal family had come that year. This was during the end of the pandemic period. But the roar from this parade ring, the public rapture, and they were thrilled to see her. And as she got out of the car and went to the royal box, and hopefully that provided her with a wonderful memory of Ascot.
She was a great supporter of the racecourse here, and I know you can't let us into too many secrets, but is it fair to say Her Majesty kept you all on your toes?
Well, Her Majesty was certainly very interested in everything that happened here. I mean, I remember a wet and windy winter's morning in 2006, just before the stand was going to be reopened, where there was a practice royal procession. And Her Majesty was standing pretty much where you and I are now, and waited for the carriage horses to arrive, so she could satisfy herself that the horses were going to be comfortable with the size of the parade ring, the horse walk layout and such like. And that is the level of interest and detail that the Queen took in Ascot. And she came just pre-pandemic also for a tour of the racecourse to see various areas of the course which she wouldn't normally see, such as the movable turf crossing on the far side of the track. So Her Majesty was absolutely involved. She loved to hear about the race planning ideas. She was thrilled with the introduction of the Commonwealth Cup, mainly because that was the name of the race and it commemorated something that was so close to her heart. But Her Majesty's representative, Sir Francis Brooke, and his predecessor Johnny Weatherby, and before him the Duke of Devonshire during my time, would always talk to her about racing matters, race planning, ideas that we might have, and the things that were going on in the racing industry.
And finally, Nick, a huge debt of gratitude owed by racing to Her Majesty the Queen. How will she ultimately be remembered by this sport?
I think as an expert, an enthusiast, a successful owner and breeder, and somebody who brought life, passion and colour to our wonderful sport.
Leading trainer John Gosden gives us his personal reflections on what the Queen meant not just to the sport of horse racing, but to the nation and its people.
I think I'm like everybody, a great sense of loss, and that someone who has been basically the foundation of our whole system had this country, and is head of state for so many years, since 1953. I mean, that is an extraordinary length, as we know. So to all of us, it's hard, but what an amazing reign and selfless sense of duty, and also done with a great understanding of her people, the institutions, and always done with a twinkle in the eye as well, with humour. I remember the Queen telling me, she's actually probably been quoted this week, that during the war, they were in London, and then her father said to her, the King, let's go and see the filly, the mare, the great race mare, Sun Chariot. It was down at Beckhampton in Wiltshire, so off they headed down the A4. And she always said that when she was standing at the edge of the box, her father said, come, Elizabeth, and see the filly. She went up, and I touched, and that was it, touching the skin and the beautiful, like a silk-like. And that was at age 16. And so you can see from then on through her not only a fascination, but her very deep and profound knowledge of the horses, and of course her passion for it. And it's in the 1950s, Sir Noel Merlis, Lester Piggott, with Carrozza winning the Oaks. And then you can go on through Oriel and all of the others, right through to the present day. I remember Dunfermline winning the St Leger, and I saddled the Ledge that day for Vincent O'Brien. We were knocked sideways. We did go and win the Arc next time, a Ledge, but we didn't expect Dunfermline to come past us, which she did. And obviously, Her Majesty liked visiting her stables around the country, and particularly Newmarket. She would come here and see the horses on the gallop, see them here in the yard. I remember very well when we presented all our horses to her probably 3 years ago, and she was showing her horses, and then she said, you'd like to see a Nabal. And so Frankie Dettori was here, and he suddenly decided he'd become master of ceremonies. So a Nabal was brought round just the corner there, and then Frankie looked at a Nabal and he says, you may think you're the Queen, but that is the real Queen. So, there was always humour. And the other great thing with the Queen, that there was always a bit of teasing as well. But she could see right through and into any issue. You can see through people, had a great feel for horses. And there's no doubt with Sandringham nearby here that she would see all of the foals, the yearlings, do the matings with John Warren, and just plan everything from beginning to end. So she was passionate of her knowledge of breeding and of the thoroughbred. And I think that is totally unique. And to her, it was her great, it was her joy, but also it was her relaxation. The trainers would call at 10 o'clock. Between 10 past 10, you're given your slot. Every day a horse was going to run with the Queen. And they were, you know, you want to have it right and everything, but they were always wonderful conversations because you talk about the horse, talk about the race, and then you talk about other things. And they were, you know, for us, it was very thrilling to be able to talk one-to-one on the phone like that, knowing that that was a 15-minute period in her incredibly busy day that she set aside to listen to what are sometimes known as her miscreant children, the trainers. We actually set up here the statue at the top of the town of the Queen standing with the mare and foal. And, you know, there were maquettes done of that, which is a smaller version, obviously. And she was presented with one in the house here. And I'll never forget it. She looked and immediately said, I know where that's going. And there was a great state visit from President Trump a few days later. And of course, he liked to stand rather largely in front of everybody. And there in the Buckingham Palace and Rotunda Room there is Trump. And even his tummy couldn't block out the sight of this maquette of herself and the mare and foal sitting on the round table in the Rotunda. But an extraordinary person to meet and see, and it didn't matter who you were. She treated everyone exactly the same. It's an extraordinary reign. The fact that she was only 2 years ago at Royal Ascot, couldn't go this year. But that is something of which has enormous sense of gravitas and momentum. And of course, nothing is forever, though we sort of thought it would be. It seemed that the Queen was immortal. But I think, obviously, King Charles and Camilla, his wife, she is very keen on horses, and hopefully the great tradition in the royal family will continue. Certainly, I would hope that there would be continuity. There's a stud, as I say, nearby here, and there's an incredible history from the time of James I here, and you go back to where the museum is and the very old palace and the stables underneath, so it does go way back to the 1600s. It's as though this nation, in a sense, lent on her. Yeah. She was always there as a constant. And I think, you know, you think of the Rock of Gibraltar, a rock is not a bad analogy, as the Prime Minister said, on which modern Britain is built. And I think that is something that, you know, we have in, obviously, the King now is the most prepared of any king. And he'll obviously has been taking quite a lot of duties recently. So the continuity is there. It's just that, you know, we've been incredibly fortunate, obviously, throughout our lives to have had the Queen as our monarch, and an extraordinary reign, and something that I think people will reflect on it for centuries to come.
We can hear now from two top jockeys who both wore the royal silks of Her Majesty the Queen, starting with Richard Hughes, who of course went on to train as well as ride for the Queen.
Just to be part of it was absolutely privileged, and I couldn't believe my luck when she rang up after I retired that would I like to train for her. You know, the fact she even said, would you like to train for me, goes without saying.
So what was it like? Of course, I think you rode 50 winners for Her Majesty, didn't you?
Yeah, and when I was a jockey, I probably took them for granted at the time. And even now training, I'm sure in decades' time when my children come along that my dad trained for the Queen. You know, it's very special.
And what was she like? Obviously, she was a wonderful horsewoman herself. Did she take an interest in, when you were riding, tactics and the horse itself?
Yeah, she loved that part of it. She came down to Richard Hannon's in Easter time, and we had a horse called Free Agent. And Her Majesty hadn't had a winner at Ascot for 10 years, and the new grandstand had just been built. So it was a huge, big thing on that year. And so we planned the race at the Cheshire. We go to Leicester when it's maiden, and then we go for the Cheshire when he won. Those things never happen, but Richard done a brilliant job training the horse, and it all worked out, and it was a fabulous day.
How often did you speak to her, and how did she communicate with you?
I would ring the Queen before her runner and after the runner, and you would get anxious before you dialed the number. But once Her Majesty said good morning to you, you were at total ease, which is quite amazing. And all the conversations I had with Her Majesty, not once did she not understand my Irish accent. Very sharp woman, and we had some lovely conversations, and I'll cherish them. When you're in it and you're doing it, you don't realise how privileged you are. But now you look back, and I've been very privileged altogether.
She was very easy to talk to. I only ever felt at ease with her, you know. She was very easy to deal with, you know.
She wasn't a type owner that just turned up. She wanted to know about the horse as well. She actually loved, as much as racing, she loved horses, didn't she?
Absolutely. I mean, I think she liked all animals a lot, but she loved her racehorses, and she loved it as a sport. And that was lucky for all of us, you know, to have somebody that is ruling the country that is in love with horses, and that carried on all through our life, as you know.
It's touching how racing has really clubbed together and in mourning for Her Majesty.
Oh, for sure, and then not just racing, but the whole country she'll be sadly missed.
We can hear next from two of the Queen's most recent trainers, starting with Clive Cox, who begins by telling us how he came to be on the royal roster of trainers.
Well, thankfully, a couple of years ago, John Warren came to see me, and it was a huge privilege and honour, not entirely expected, I'll be honest with you. And it's been an absolute amazing experience, and very proud and honoured to have had that association, and yeah, I'm extremely sad to hear the news. To actually deal with her individually, with having horses for her, was extremely special, and it was a real joy because she put you at ease immediately, and she was so knowledgeable about the horses, and that affection of horses was the whole relaxing aspect in it all. She knew exactly what she was talking about, individual horses, and it was a real joy.
She used to come and just stand and look at the horses and spend wherever, you know, half an hour out there looking at them. They paraded up and down, and she would notice the physical development and, oh, I think this needs more time or whatever. You know, she was a very keen eye, and always wanted the best for her horses. Her knowledge of the horse was, you know, incredible, and a wealth and depth of knowledge and experience. And she would pick things up in a race if a horse was pulling, or if it looked uncomfortable on the wrong leg, and you know, she didn't miss a trick, and just loved it. And as I say, her enthusiasm and was just infectious.
I spoke to her on Tuesday morning, which will be a very, very deep and lasting memory. But she was fine, and it was really nice to have that winner with Love Affairs at Goodwood. Special racetrack, and really nice to have that winner.
And what's it like when your phone rings and it says Her Majesty the Queen on the phone, and to have spoken to her?
Quite surreal, really. But she was just such an amazing person. I think everybody knows and agrees, and we all feel the sadness in losing her, but she just was so nice to talk to, and yeah, it's a very, very special memory.
One of the places she was most comfortable was being at the races and seeing horses and being around her friends. And you know, she had a great sense of humour, and particularly loved talking to, you know, I remember we used to sort of have a relatively small lunch, and Ryan Moore would be there, and she'd love listening to what he had to say. And I'm sure it goes back to the days of Joe Mercer and all her other great jockeys that have ridden for her. And you know, she was just wonderful to be around on a racecourse. She used to go to Newbury and stay with the Warrens, and in a relatively, well, principally a private capacity, go and see the Hannons and then go to Newbury. And so we were all instructed to try and rally as many runners as we possibly could. And I managed to have 2 winners at Newbury for over those 7 or 8 years, I suppose, that she went and we trained for her. And so to do that and to sit next to her in the box at Newbury cheering one home was, you know, just very, very special.
Hopefully the memories and legacy that she had such a very strong interest, she was such a knowledgeable person, and I think the history books will show for a long time, you know, how important she was within the racing industry. But I think, you know, that involvement, racing is a special game, really, and we're all really lucky to be involved, but to share it with somebody like Her Majesty is extremely special.
Her presence was extraordinary, and I'm sure the King will do his, you know, try and fill her shoes on the racecourse, but you know, there's only going to be one person who could breed horses and have such an depth of knowledge and interest, and that's Her Majesty.
We can hear now from racing commentator Derek Thompson. We spoke to Derek at Newmarket, a place where the Queen herself was a regular visitor.
We will never ever forget this day, and to be here at Newmarket, which is steeped in history, where she used to come. She'd be on the gallops at 7 in the morning. You know, you'd say, "Who's that? Is that the Queen?" Yes, and she was just watching her horses. She was an incredible woman. I remember her with great affection. I've seen most of her big wins over the past 50 years. I've been lucky enough to be there, you know, at Ascot, at Epsom, but all the other tracks, you know, and when we're commentating, and the Queen had a winner, and it's the win for Her Majesty. It's a very proud thing. I'll tell you a true story. I went to Sandringham one evening, Bob Champion and I, and there's about 50 people. We were all having a glass of sherry and a glass of wine, and she was going around talking to people. She would always carry a glass of water and a napkin. And she came over to me and she looked me in the eyes and said, "I know you." I said, "I know you as well." And we had just a great chat about racing, about horses, and she loved it. You know, she was so keen on it. And she bred horses, she went to the races, she led them in, the royal procession at Ascot. You know, it won't be the same without her.
Up-and-coming young trainer Charlie Fellows gives us a personal recollection now of meeting the Queen.
I did on one occasion have the honour of meeting her in person, and it was one of those days that was just sort of it's almost like you were floating through the day. I remember it all vividly. I'd been training for about 3 years. I remember the call I got to find out that I'd been asked to go to lunch at Windsor Castle before Royal Ascot, and I was driving down to Lingfield. I was on the M25, and I promise you, I genuinely, hand on heart, thought it was one of my friends winding me up, because it was a gentleman on the other end of the line saying, "This is the Queen's Equerry, and we wondered if there was any chance you'd like to come for lunch at Windsor Castle and then join the Queen in her box at Ascot." And it was not something that I ever thought I'd be invited to. And I remember thinking that it was not, you know. Anyway, the invitation came through the post, and the night before I didn't sleep that well. I turned up at Windsor Castle so early, like ridiculously early, because I was so worried about being late. And you go through security, and the Queen's Equerry was there waiting for me, and he ushered me into his room. He's like, "You're a little bit early, so you better come into the room here," and gave me a glass of Coca-Cola. And in the room, I remember seeing the board that had this seating plan for lunch. And I went over, and my name was in the middle of Her Majesty the Queen and Princess Anne. And that did nothing for my nerves whatsoever. I'm probably not allowed to do this, but I took a photo of it and sent it to my boys' WhatsApp group at school, which then proceeded to go mad. Eventually got taken upstairs, and I was just so nervous. I just remember, luckily, Lord and Lady Vestey, the late Lord and Lady Vestey, were there, and they'd been owners with James Fanshawe, so I knew them. It was nice to have a sort of friendly face there, and anyone who knows them would have known that they were the perfect people to have there. And then the Queen entered and said hello, and sat down at the table, and she just could not have been nicer. I mean, and obviously it was always going to be that way. It was just an unbelievably surreal moment. They were enormous enthusiasts of something that I loved, and therefore it was a very, very easy conversation. There was no sort of small talk or anything like that. It all flowed really, you know, perfectly. And I remember halfway through, you go from one side, and then she very, very obviously turns around. Right now, we're meant to sort this side, and it just, the whole day was magical. And yesterday, I didn't think I would be as affected by it as I was. But I remember yesterday I was at Southall, and when we heard the news come through, I really, really did get quite emotional. And some of the stuff you see is just wonderful looking back. And what she's done for our country and for our sport is amazing, and we will miss her so much. You know, she loved horse racing. And yeah, I'm very close to William Haggas, and I remember he cherishes the phone conversations he has with her before a runner. We will miss her a lot, and I really, really hope that racing continues to be of interest to the royal family, because not having them as part of our sport will be a huge loss to everyone.
Absolutely nobody who witnessed the scenes of celebration following Estimate's memorable success in the Gold Cup at Royal Ascot could ever doubt what horse racing gave to Her Majesty the Queen. It's time now for the sport to reflect on what Her Majesty gave to horse racing.